Ending 20 years of military occupation, the last US troops headed home on August 30th, leaving behind a trail of hopelessness, desperation, and the destruction for Afghans in the weeks leading up to the Taliban as the Taliban ran rampant and reconquered the country. The hasty and abrupt pullout has left Afghans in fear and despair as the Taliban, day by day, continues to unfurl its true barbaric colors, violating the fundamental terms of the peace deal and every code of humanity along with it. But how did we get here? What is the peace deal that America signed with the Taliban, and what's the significance of the Doha negotiations that have been pivotal in ending the 20 years of US military occupation and America's longest war? Let's have a look. In early 2020, the US had signed a deal with Taliban after a series of negotiations in Doha under the leadership of President Donald Trump.
Endless war in Afghanistan, 19 years, going on 20 years, and there hasn't been a moment like this. We've had very successful negotiations. We think they'll be successful in the end.
Now, adhering to the deal stuck, the current US President Joe Biden said this deal meant that he inherited a stark choice. In other words, he meant that he had no choice but to move ahead with his deal. However, he stayed mum on the mismanagement entailed.
I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021. Just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season.
Now let's take a look at what this agreement he has chosen to follow contain. First of all, he put a date on the US departure that there would be full withdrawal of US forces by May 2021, so long as the Taliban kept its size of bargain. Now, the date was pushed back by Joe Biden to August, but the deal told the Taliban precisely when the Americans will exit the conflict. In return, the Taliban made a number of commitments. The Taliban agreed to not attack US personnel. It promised to restrict any activity that would threaten the US, including terror attacks abroad. There is a section in the deal that reads that the Taliban would not allow any of its members, other individuals or groups like the Al-Qaeda to use the soil of Afghanistan to threaten the security of the US and its allies. Now, the Taliban in return got assurances on the release of thousands of its fighters who were in fact imprisoned. That was the US effectively agreeing to the release of prisoners in Afghanistan without involving the Afghan government. Prisoners released were fighters and senior figures with a long record of killing civilians and restricting women's rights and girls' education. It was also seen as a confidence-building measure. The deal also consists of several references to a need for a political settlement in Afghanistan and the following phrase, a new post-Afghan Islamic government as determined by the intra-Afghan dialogue and negotiations. Reacting to the peace deal, then Afghan President, that is Ashraf Ghani, has said that a verdict is out that there was no headway made between the two sides. Several experts have now called the Doha negotiation as an unfair negotiation because nobody looked for the interest of the Afghan government. Delving back to the world history, even deals and treaties post the world wars included the participation of nations that had lost. Never had a successful peacekeeping deal had been completely excluded its own country's government in negotiations. And as the Taliban advanced through the Afghanistan in June and July, US President Biden's emphasis was on the Afghan government taking responsibility. But the government Joe Biden wanted to have the strength and confidence to face and resist the Taliban was the same government the US left out of the Doha negotiations. It's the Afghan government that the US did not inform before leaving Balram Air Base in July. Perhaps instead of building confidence, the deal did the reverse for the government when its standing with the Afghans was already fragile. And then there was the ex-president Ashraf Ghani. Last week, he was in exile and was posting his final messages through Facebook and had effectively been told by the US that he was no longer a figure in his country. Then there was Joe Biden not budging an inch from his word, who went ahead anyways with the withdrawal of the troops and stuck with his 31st August deadline, having been left with no choice as the Taliban entered and took Kabul unopposed. Which leads us back to the deal. When it was done, both sides and their own priorities above all else were in place. For the US, it was getting out of Afghanistan, and for Taliban, it was getting control of their country. And now the US has left. Donald Trump wanted this, Joe Biden wants this. And so it's now the Taliban that controls the streets, Afghanistan's people, and continues with its atrocities from 20 years ago. And Doha deal played its part in making this happen. What lies ahead for the Afghan people? Who is to blame for this debacle? And what lies ahead for those thousands of people still wanting to get out of the Taliban rule? Only time will tell.